Wassmer, and I'm here to talk about content and content strategy and why it matters for designers and developers. So let's get started. I want to talk about what content is. I think a lot of people, and I'm a marketer, so I'm probably guilty of this, I think a lot of people think content strategy is copywriting and stuff that marketing folk do, and designers and developers think it's nothing to do with me. Well, you're wrong, because content strategy and content is everything. Content is anything that actually conveys information. And okay, that's a little ambiguous, but content is everything from copy, of course, text, images, icons, logos, audio, video. I mean, absolutely anything that goes into the digital world that you guys create is content. So I think it's really important to understand that content isn't just copywriting. I think I'll say that again. I think that because there have a lot of people who are involved in content strategy who seem to think it's just about copywriting and copy and marketing and stuff that isn't for designers and developers. So I just want you guys to know that it really is about you, and that designers and developers, UX people, and so on play a hugely important part. And without you guys, the content that marketers write or copywriters write is kind of useless. So you guys are a really important part of the cycle. So why is content and content strategy so important for people involved in UX, designers and developers? Because the web is big, interactive, you have lots of different channels, lots of different people using all sorts of different devices in all sorts of different environments. And so you have quite a complex and quite an unwieldy environment. So, you've got websites, you've got mobile apps, you've got web apps, you've got blogs, you've got news aggregators, you've got people on mobile, you've got different sizes of mobile, you've got different platforms. I mean, you just have so many different ways that people are going to access your content. And, in the old days when you had in the beginning of the web, when you had a static HTML site and you just pushed your content out there static and no one interacted with it, and isn't that nice? Well, that was easy. But now, people are interacting with your content in all sorts of different places, in all sorts of different environments. And it isn't even like, somebody, okay, well, that person's in an office, they'll be on a desktop, and the person at home is going to be on a mobile, on an iPad, and the person out's going to be on a mobile. That's not the case. It's people using all sorts of different devices, all sorts of different channels, all sorts of different environments, all sorts of different reasons. And the content that you guys create has to be able to work and be adaptable in all of those different environments. And so it's really complex, and it takes all of the digital team's might to be able to make content strategy work. So what is content strategy? What matters? So what are the characteristics of content strategy? And if nothing else, it's findable. If you can't find it, you can't use it. So, you have to think about, how do most people find stuff? Google. You go, you do a Google search. If you can't find it, it can't be anything else. So you have all these other characteristics, of all the things that content needs to be. It needs to be relevant and meaningful, and it needs to be useful and usable. It needs to be all of these characteristics, but mostly findable. And that is due to the whole way that people use and access content. And the web is really unwieldy. I mean, when you used to want to find information, pre-web, anyone old enough to remember? So like pre-web, you went to a library, and you got information. You had these index cards and these great systems of categorization, and now you just got Google, and it's all like whoa, and they're changing their algorithms every day, and it's a bit of a fight to get your content seen. So it's really important to know and to think about all of these characteristics and making sure that your content meets these criteria. So who's involved in content strategy? Well, everyone. It's everyone from, the managing director of the company, the people who are involved in business strategy, marketers, designers, developers, UX people, people who are developing apps, websites, whatever, anyone who's even involved in thinking about, interacting with, or working on your digital content or digital platforms, website, apps, whatever. Everybody who's involved in the digital team should be involved in content strategy. I know that's not always the case, and sometimes the digital team is one person, so that person has all of these roles. So, the reality is it's great to say all of these different people are involved, and sometimes those different people can be 1, 20, 50, it depends on the size of the company. But what is important is that you understand that these are the roles that need to be responsible. So it's, okay, if I'm going to do content strategy right, I need to give these disciplines consideration, and how much consideration you're going to be able to give them, and how in depth you're going to be able to go depends on the resources that you have. But this is I guess content strategy nirvana has all of these different people or all individual roles. So how do you get started? How do you think about content strategy? And this really goes back to marketing discipline. And I think that I'm going to have a slight aside here and talk about what I think UX is, because I probably might get shot for this, but I know UX is obviously much more complex. But because I'm a marketer, in trying to explain to clients what UX was, my thing is saying UX is a user's experience of your brand online, and that's it. I know it's lots more things, but ultimately that's what it's about, because you have users and you have your brand and you have what your brand promises, what you're trying to deliver to those users, and making sure you meet those users' needs. So in that sense, it goes back to a very basic discipline, and it's a traditional marketing discipline, which is why I also think, hopefully I don't get shot for this either, that UX is a subset of marketing, because user experience is about your users and how you engage and interact with them. And that to me is marketing. But I would say that because I'm a marketer. But so really, knowledge and insight. Knowledge and insight are about getting to understand everything you can about your users, and getting to know your brand, understanding your brand. So, you may be lucky enough to work for a forward-thinking company, you got some brand guidelines, and, you have an understanding or a good relationship with marketers. You may not. I come from, quite a traditional advertising background, and so for me, the idea of having a creative team, being an art director and a copywriter, being a creative person and a marketer, always made sense. And so, in the digital world, you bring a technology person into the mix. So, you're looking at design, development, and marketing, and those disciplines all need to work together to understand the brand, to understand what it is, what your brand promises, what you're telling your users that you're going to do, what you're putting, setting at your stall, what you're saying, how you're saying it, and making sure that the technology that you develop gives that message. The design, the platform, the interactions, everything is basically on brand. So it isn't just about what you write, it's about the person's experience. It's about the things that you don't say and how that person experiences it. That needs to be on brand. So it's understanding what you're trying to do and making sure that that is married with what your users want and what they're wanting to do. So basically, if your website sells rubber ducks, then you are saying, we sell great rubber ducks, and you've got users that want to buy rubber ducks and they have the money, and so you're basically getting a marriage there of what the users want and what you're trying to put out there. And knowing both of those things and having insight into what your users want and what your brand is, and making sure that you're making that connection, is the birth of beautiful interactions. So the content lifecycle is really about, where you start, and nasty mobile phones. I'm sorry. Where you start, and start by basically, getting an understanding, learning about things, planning, scoping, developing, and it's exactly really pretty much a very similar process to what you do when you develop a website. But content strategy, it's circular and it's cyclical. So you start with what you want to do, what you're planning, looking at your content, deciding what you want to do, what you want your strategy to be. And by the time you're finished and you've looked at it, you've monitored it, you've measured it, you've evaluated it, you start again. So it just keeps on going round and round, because obviously the one thing that we have in the digital world is content. And I remember back in the old internet boom in the late 90s, everyone was saying content is king. Well, content is king. And that's what really matters. So the content lifecycle isn't something you say, okay, well, I'm going to do content strategy now for 10 minutes, and then let's do that strategy. That's great, and it's finished. It isn't. It's just, it should be part of your process. Content strategy should be part of the whole process of development. Now we have something for the geeks in the room. Back-end developers, anyone? Data. So this is where information architecture comes in, and where data really matters. So, I know that a lot of us use content management systems, but it's really understanding the structure of your database, about how that database is structured, your data, your metadata, your classification taxonomies, which I'll talk about in a minute, and basically making sure that everything's well organized, it's well structured, it's well labeled, people can find it, people can use it, and that anyone who goes to look at your database, it isn't it isn't a language that you speak as a database developer or someone who creates a database schema. It's a language that everybody understands, that you use a way of creating the system for storing and managing your data so that people can find it, because it needs to be findable. So data is really, really important. And I know that there was a period of time where people developed bespoke websites and back-end developers were everything, and then content management systems where back-end developers got fired. And now back-end developers need to be back again, because it's really, really important to make sure that you have a fantastically well-structured database. It isn't just, oh, that's a MySQL database, let's just implement that. You have to think about your DB schema, you have to think about how your data is managed, and that is the foundation of a great content strategy and user experience. So people seem to think that content management and content management systems are the same thing, but they're not. So content management is a process of, well, then it's kind of self-explanatory, managing content, and a content management system is the actual system that you use to store and manage the content and so on. And I'm expecting most of you, except for CyberDuck, who don't use a content management system because they decided they didn't need one. And they decided that it was actually better for them to manage their content by themselves, because they're designers and developers, and you can just go in and change your code. And it was actually better for them, a better system, a more efficient way of managing their content by not using a content management system. It's really important to think about the process and think about what your needs are, and think about what systems you're using, because a lot of people are like, oh, we use this system and that system, and you become used to using it, or you're a specialist in using it. But it's also thinking about, whether the system is suitable, whether it's fit for purpose, and whether it actually meets your needs, meets your process, meets your client's needs, and so on. So now we're getting really down to the geek stuff. But I really like this. It's because this is where things make sense. So classification, taxonomies, and metadata. And it does sound incredibly geeky. But classification is basically just labels, what you name something. You're a human being. That's a classification in the taxonomy of nature. And taxonomy is a system that holds these classifications, and metadata is data about data. So metadata is, say, you have a website and you have a system of tagging blogs. So tag is metadata. And you have metadata within a system. So let's say you have ways of labeling things within your system, or other metadata, like if you have an image that you upload, you don't really want to be uploading image JPG 2652. You want to be uploading an image that actually has some meaning. So it's thinking about that level of information, thinking about, okay, what do you name things? What makes sense? And you may find that you are designing a website or work for a company where their classification, taxonomies, and metadata is different in different departments for how you manage different types of information. So you may find the process of content strategy something you can do and actually make the business more efficient. So it's really not that complicated. It's just a way of looking at things to make sure that you have that things make sense, and that things are standardized, and that everybody's talking the same language, and that things aren't that complicated, so that internally, when you're using your system, you know where to find things, you know what the system and structure is, so that, and if you are using content management system, and you develop this great website, then you hand it over to your client or marketers to manage it, that they understand the classification and the system and how it works and how to manage it properly. And also externally, so for people who are looking for things in your website, they also know how your system works, how things are labeled, how tags work, or those sorts of things. So it's really important to think about these things, and they're not sort of really esoteric things. They're actually very straightforward and sensible things. If you look at your content management system that you're using, you'll see it is a hierarchical system. So it will have classification, taxonomies, and metadata. You may be able to change it to suit your needs, you may not, but at least you have a system you're working with, and that everybody works across the same system and knows what they're doing. At the end of the day, what it comes down to, what really matters, is where brand and product and user meet. And that's an interaction, because what really matters is how people interact with your content. It's all well and fine having content that looks great, But if when you interact with it, it doesn't work or it doesn't do what you say you do or you want it to do, and you're not able to track it or handle it or manage it or know where it's going or any of these sorts of things, it then becomes a problem for your users and you get drop-off. So managing the interactions is really the goal of content strategy, is to get to a point where you've got the product, your brand, and your users, and everybody's happy, and everybody understands what they're doing. People are managing things behind... Sorry, I know this keeps on going loud, and I'm not very good at this. I'll probably knock myself in the head with it shortly. And so that everybody sort of meets in the middle and understands, and you're using the same language. I mean, it is ultimately a language and getting familiar with working in this way and working together to deliver something at the end that everybody is a part of. So when you're doing this, you need to be thinking about what you do, what your competitors do, how you're going to do it. So, the first thing that you need to do is think about, okay, what's out there? So I'm going to develop this great content strategy, but what kind of systems am I going to use? What resources do I have? What resources do I have internally? What's out there? What information is out there? Going to see someone speak about content strategy, or going to, reading articles, or are you thinking you need a new content management system? Looking at that content management system in a different light, thinking, this is interesting. I'm thinking about metadata, and that system's terrible. That system doesn't tag anything. And so it's just thinking about, okay, what are we using now? And looking outside and thinking, how can I improve content strategy? What resources are out there? What can I do? How can we make things better? And then, obviously, looking at what your competitors are doing. Looking under the hood of people's websites, apps, and seeing what people are doing. Doing some tests, looking at, a couple of your competitors, looking at, don't just look at the people who are top in the field. Look at someone who's top, someone who's a rising star, and someone who's about to go insolvent. And look at what they're doing. What are they doing well? What are they doing badly? Do some Google searches. How easy it is to find their content. And when you find it, what are you finding? What pages are you going on? And really just understanding what's out there. What are people doing, and how can you do better? How can your content be more meaningful, more findable? And then the next thing is looking at internally, and being really harsh, saying, okay, this content we have actually it doesn't work. It's not working for us anymore. Archive it. And even when you're archiving it, do it well. Do it so that maybe at a later date you can bring it out of retirement. Don't just dump it somewhere in some folder XYZ12 or whatever. Make sure that even when you're archiving things, that it's managed properly. But really look inside and say, okay, what content's relevant? What do we need? What's meaningful? What is helping our customers? What is helping us? Because there's a lot of content out there, and there's a lot of stuff that's very bloated. So it's a good time to take stock. It's a good time to look at what you're doing, against your competitors, what resources you have, and really just it's taking stock and working out, how can we do this better? So implementing content strategy then comes on to something called editorial strategy, which is kind of probably why people think it's about copywriting. But editorial strategy, again, is something that comes from really print magazines, and it comes from having a cycle and knowing how often you need to update your content. So for instance, your address on your website, you're probably not going to change that very often, but if you have a website that's selling lots of rubber ducks, and you're selling lots of different new rubber ducks. I know, it's a rubber duck. I'm trying to be cute. And you're selling lots of different types of rubber ducks, and you get new content every day. Then you need to consider that in your life cycle. Or if you're blogging, okay, you need to blog once a week, or however often you blog, and making sure that's consistent. So it's looking at editorial strategy in terms of what type of content do we want? How often do we want that content? What resources do we have to create that content? Do we want audio? Do we want video? If the chief executive wants a video, every day, but you don't have the resources to do it, you have to consider that. And that's part of editorial strategy. That's actually getting down to the detail of what you want to put in there. And so you create an editorial calendar. Say you create a calendar for over a year period or a month or whatever period of time is relevant to you. And then everybody knows what they're doing. The person who's doing the video knows, the person who creates the PDFs for this section knows. And so everybody knows what they're doing, and you create a workflow and a schedule, again, in the same way you would when you're designing a website, except you're designing your content. You're designing your content strategy, and you're creating the editorial strategy and structure and calendar so that you don't miss a beat, that you're on schedule, you're on time, you're on brand, and you're delivering what your users want. So, and we're back to geeks again. Information architecture, it just matters. having a solid foundation, having a great database, all these things that, we kind of started to forget about with content management systems are sort of now coming back to haunt us, because if you don't have that great structure, then it doesn't matter what great code or what you've got going on in the front end, or even server-side scripting, because you're going to have a lot of content that needs to serve lots of different distribution channels. So getting your information architecture right at the outset is critical. And so then once you've done all that, really easy stuff, isn't it? And once you've done all that, which is really hard work, you can be creative, because I kind of think of web designers, no offense guys, like children. So when children have no parameters and they have no rules, it's chaos. And when you have rules and parameters, you have an incredible amount of freedom within that. And I think that content strategy gives you a really solid foundation. It gives you an understanding of what you need, when, how, and things are rational. You're understanding how you're meeting your brand's needs, how you're meeting your users' needs, how you're delivering things in a structured and ordered and sensible way, and communicating using the same common language. And so it solves a lot of problems that designers have when they don't have that foundation. So you don't have to worry about all that stuff. You can just get on with being creative and being deep and meaningful and creating fantastic content, because all the other things that can be really troublesome are resolved. You're working in an interdisciplinary team, even if it's just you're your own interdisciplinary team, and you're bringing all those disciplines together, and you're thinking about all that stuff up front, so you can just get on with being creative and creating great content. You know what you need to do, it's just creating it. Easier said than done, I'm sure. And really, at the end of all of that, once you've put your creative, fantastic content out there and distributed it across every channel on the internet and out in the universe, you need to be making sure that you're monitoring and measuring it and evaluating it and making sure that you improve it, and that when you go to the beginning of the content lifecycle and start again, that you're creating great content. And that's my story. So thank you for listening, guys, and yeah.
Do a quick Q&A? Is it right if we do a quick Q&A?
Oh, sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions for Sandi at all? Yep. So the question was, does mind mapping help with UX?
Yes, yes, it does. It's not. So mind mapping isn't something that I use, but anything that helps you to structure and articulate what you want to do, and when you're working in a team, and that helps you to solve problems before you're designing and developing, yes, absolutely. So it depends, and it depends on the people, the team, and whether or not you have to be amenable to it. You have to want to use that, and you have mind mapping is works for some people, doesn't work for others. So obviously it needs to be suitable for your team, but if it is, then yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yep, in the front.
So you said print media editorial cycle works quite well for online content management?
It's the original, to me. I mean, it's the source. That's what it's based on. But it's not exactly the same, because obviously, print is a completely different medium. But it's the idea of having an editorial calendar, of knowing what you need when and who needs to be doing it. So because unlike just developing a website and leaving it, when you just create a website and that's it, it's static. It's because content is constantly changing, constantly needing fresh content. You need to have the editorial calendar to know, okay, once a week, every day we update news. Once a week we update the blog. We have these types of articles. We have articles in this category once every 2 months, or whatever the cycle is. So that you know what you need when, and that you're prepared. That you're constantly working towards those deadlines.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah. Second row.
I want to know, how do you anticipate changes in the architecture of a big site, or things that you don't have already?
Yeah. So the question is, how do you anticipate change in the architecture of a website? Yeah.
As best you can. I mean, that's a kind of a $6 million. Oh gosh, sorry. No, I'm not drunk. That's bad balance. That's a $6 million question. I mean, that really depends on what the kind of company you're working for, what the information architecture is, what sort of processes that you have in place in order to be developing, what your development, so the actual development cycle is. But when you're starting the process, you take stock. You look at, okay, what do we have? What are we using? and what do we need. So planning into the future and doing the best you can. You can't, like, technology changes so fast. You can plan into the future as far as you can based on what you know now and what you anticipate. So it's just being as intelligent as you can, and using using that intelligence, looking at what other people are doing, looking at what's out there, looking at what technology is out there, what suits your needs now, what do you anticipate is going to happen with the project or the website or the app or whatever in the future, and meeting those needs as best you can without developing something to such a degree now when it's something you anticipate. So it's about getting the balance. It's balancing resources properly.
Okay. Yep. And then another question.
Creating content strategy of 1, 5, 10, 20 people. How do you do it when it's just one?
So how do you create a content strategy with just one person?
By being resourceful. I'll tell you, I as it happens, and then this is a very high level talk based on. I wrote if anyone wants it, I can email it to you. I wrote a 4-part article for .NET, and so it's like a 4-part guide, Content 101, and it actually has a lot of really. I mean, I shouldn't tout my own stuff, but it's already passed. I mean, I think it was. I can't remember when I wrote it. Anyways, so if anyone wants it, contact me, and I can email it to you because it's now out of print. So I have it in PDF, and if anyone wants it, I can send it to you. And it's actually a really good resource because I just put everything in the kitchen sink that I knew. So it's done in 4 parts, over 4 issues of .NET. So I can send it to you.
Excellent.
I mean, it's difficult, but you can do it. I mean, at least you're trying. At least you're thinking about content in this way.
Okay, excellent. I think if any other questions, obviously come up and speak to Sandi afterwards. But ladies and gentlemen, Sandi Wassmer.